Hi, how you doing? My name is Greg from Triplets, and I'm going to teach you how to play Ghost of Perdition by Opeth. All right, before we get started, most important thing, we got to be in the right tuning for this. Opeth uses a D minor add 9 tuning. D, A, D, F, A, E. Another way to think about it is the 6th string, the 3rd string, and the 2nd string are all tuned down one whole step. So you get this really neat chord. Opeth likes to use that chord in general, so the fact that they just sort of tuned right to it as an open tuning, and it kind of gives this whole album a certain vibe. Although not every song on the album is in this tuning, but most of them are, or at least half of them. All right, so the intro, before you get scared out of your shoes, the intro is, now all our chord forms are going to be funny because we're in this funny tuning. So of course you can refer to the tab. There will be a link down below to it. But all of our chord forms are a little funny. We start off with just a regular D minor, and then D minor major 7. You have that C sharp in there, that sharp 7. And then the next chord is an F augmented. I'm calling it F augmented major 7 because he hits the open E in there. I'm not 100% sure if he meant it, but it's ringing in there. It sounds pretty cool. So we hit that twice. And then finally D sus2 to an A chord with D in the bass. So that whole intro. All right, and then that brings you to the riff of meme legend, 8 seconds, right? So that super heavy, awesome riff, it starts with the same idea. D minor to D minor major 7. Then the other cool thing about this tuning is it is a drop D tuning, even though we have other strings different. So we can do the thing that we normally do in drop D. We can play power chords just by barring across the bottom 2 or 3 strings. So he's got that little like blues rock, blues metal thing in there. So far we got. Cool. So after that, Opeth loves to do these cool licks utilizing the open strings. So we got this neat little hammer-on part. Got this neat little hammer-on part followed by a little slide. And this is one of those where you're sliding into the same note that's the open string, the next open string. Sliding in C sharp to D, then you hit the open D. This little minor major 3rd hammer-on pull-off deal. So if you put that together, you get. And the next part is this little chromatic descending part on the A string. So. Then we do this. This next lick is a kind of like Michael favorite. Does this kind of thing in a lot of songs, where regardless of the tuning, regardless of the string he's on, he loves to do these little pointer finger, middle finger, and then followed by ring finger on the previous string, and then even including middle finger. So this exact lick is in it's in Blackwater Park and it's in Leper Affinity in 2 places, just off the top of my head, but it's in a lot of places. He loves that little. I believe it's in Bleak as well, off of Blackwater Park, so it's all over the place. And just because we're in a different tuning doesn't mean it doesn't sound cool, so it still works here. So he's doing like a little variation off that finger thing. Hitting his E flat, D, and then just finishing with the open power chord. And that's the first half of the killer meme riff, right? Yeah, you can watch the playthrough or really pay attention to my transcription for what's muted and what isn't. Of course, it makes a difference, sounds much tighter, much better if everyone's on the same page, how you're muting it. Second half of the riff is exactly the same until the very end. Here are just power chords. And then you just string those two parts together and you have the whole riff. So you repeat that whole section twice. At the end of the second section, you'll see there's a second ending, and just instead of it's hold that last chord, and then you get to the devil cracked the earthly shell part. This part's really hard to sing and play at the same time. Michael actually doesn't sing and play at the same time. He just leaves the guitar part to Frederick for that part. So we've been in 6/8 the whole time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Normally feels like two groups of three. You can think of it as very slow, triplet, or again, count to 6. Here it feels much more like 6 individual downbeats. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and. I didn't write a time signature. I could write it as 6/4, but then I'd go back and forth with time signatures. It's more complicated than it needs to be. So this part's gonna feel very different, although again, it's still written in 6/8. So we got. Now the key here is you're starting with a downstroke at the beginning of the measure, that's fine, but you have one lonely note in the middle of the measure and then another group of notes. And those should be up, those should start with upstrokes. So up, up. By starting those in an upstroke, your right hand keeps that constant groove. All right, and then we have a little transition into the next part. It's kind of cool. This is like sort of splitting the difference, and you may hear it differently than I do, but I'm really hearing I'm hearing that triplet feel sometimes, and sometimes that just six distinct downbeats. Here it's sort of in between. I can kind of go either way with how I'm hearing it, but if you're having trouble with this rhythm, you only have 8ths and 16ths, and you can do what I call the long-short cheat, where you can go long, short, long, short, short, long, long, short. And just for the note that's a little longer, say the word long. For the notes that's shorter, say the word short, and of course, make it short. I'm a big fan of rhythmically, if you can say it, you can play it. Long, short, short, long, long, short. Also, at a very slow speed, this rhythm doesn't really sound correct. But as you get used to it and just speed it up little by little, you should recognize it. All right, then the next riff is, I'm calling just remember to hold the pull-off riff, right? This is sort of another, it's similar to that thing that Michael likes to do that we talked about. But it's with pinky and ring finger against 1 and 2. So the key here is just because it's a pull-off doesn't mean it's fast, or it doesn't mean that the note you're pulling off from goes fast. So make sure you hold that note here. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but. And then finally at the end, you got that 7th fret, that A that seemingly comes out of nowhere. Slide with your middle finger to get that. And then the rest of the riff, you're playing minor chords, and then power chords. And then power chords. So again, we're in a drop D tuning. Something really cool happens in drop D. 3 chords that I love to use in drop D are, instead of just your normal boring power chord, which can sound cool, by stretching up 4 frets higher than wherever you're barring, you get a major chord. Bring that down 1 fret, you get a minor chord. That's what we're using right here. And if you bring that high note down 1 more, you get a sus2, which we're going to see in a little bit. So, now when you listen to the record here, I was always under the impression that it's just all minor chords in this section. You're actually hearing some notes from the keyboards. He switches between a minor chord and a power chord. Distinction isn't that great, and if you play along with it either way, it'll probably sound all right. But so putting together that whole riff, remember to hold that pull off. Then you go into this transition riff. Sort of like before, I'm feeling really the 6 downbeats here. Contrast that with the measure you're coming right out of. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's got that very much 2 groups of 3 feel as opposed to 6 downbeats. Then you're back to Devil Crack the Earthly Shell, same exact thing. Out of here, you're going to do these 4 hits. Now, don't be one of those players that just goes, oh, I think it's here. Subdivide. By subdividing, you're counting smaller divisions of notes, and this will help your rhythm stay really, really tight and really on track. We have a 16th note followed by an 8th note rest. What that really means is it's a 16th note and 2 more 16th notes rest. Why do I say it that way? Because what ends up happening, this whole measure is 8th note, 16th, 2 16ths rest, 16th, 2 16ths rest, and 4 times. So they're all groups of 3. So if in your head you count 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, you're guaranteed to get this rhythm really nice and tight. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Now, this, again, I'm feeling this as, also in addition, I'm feeling it as the 6 separate downbeats, and you could also feel it down, up, in terms of where it lands, whether it lands on a downbeat or an upbeat. But here I really like to do the subdivision better. I feel like keeping that da 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 in my head is much more reliable. I'll get that rhythm much tighter. And then you go right back into the hold the pull off riff. From here, you're right back into the riff in the beginning of the song. I'm not going to go over it again. It's exactly the same, except at the very end, just hold your D power chord, and you'll see that's in my transcription, that's when you're going off to the coda. All right, cool, and that's kind of like the end of the first big section of the song. The next section really doesn't really change moods. It's still pretty dark, but it changes feel a lot. And so we got a couple chords we're ringing out, starting with a D sus2. A simple 3-note chord on top, 12-9-9. Then the next one, remember our open tuning is D minor add 9. If we didn't have the first string in there, it would be a straight minor chord, just D minor. And of course, when you have an open tuning like that, that means you can bar anywhere, and that's still the same kind of chord. So on 4th fret, I'm pretty sure he doesn't hit the first string here, you just a regular F sharp minor chord. Followed by what really looks like an E minor arpeggio. But of course, when you're in a different tuning, your chord forms are all sorts of different now. So, yeah, we got our D minor add 9. That's actually a D minor 6 add 9. And then going up, we get to bar those minor add 9 chords again. 8th fret is B flat minor add 9. 9th fret, B minor add 9. And finally, 10th fret, C minor add 9. Cool, and that gets us through that whole section. and strum all those chords nice and majestically. That's what that squiggly line means that you'll see next to the tab in my transcription, to arpeggiate the chord just by still kind of treating it as one hit, but we're dragging our pick through there. All right, then the next section is the Oz. I'm calling this the 12-string Oz because on the record he's using, not Oz like the wizard, like S. On the record, he's using a 12-string guitar, which makes this a little tough to figure out. For those who don't know, the 12-string guitar has, it's got 6 pairs of strings, and on the 2 thinnest strings, they're just doubled, and on the 4 fattest strings, you have a little octave string right next to it. So, so what ends up happening is you get these higher notes kind of jumping out when you pick individual notes like we're doing here. When this lick comes back later, only played on a 6th string, it's much easier to kind of hear exactly how he's picking it, but I got it for you in the transcription. So the first measure is a little weird. It's sort of unexpected, and then it follows a slightly easier pattern after that. Then after that, it's easy. Once you get there, it's pretty simple, but that first measure, just take it nice and slow. Remember that every single note in this section, this individually picked section, they should all ring and they're all even. That means when you play it slow, make sure no notes are faster than others, make sure no notes are slower than others. It's a really good way to reliably learn something solid. A little bit of strumming there. The second half of it, we're arpeggiating again, a little D harmonic minor because we're adding the C sharp. After that, we have this little lick at the end, this little kind of bass lick. And then we have a little descending part. This is yet another way to play a D minor. Then we still have the low D ringing, so while this would be an F chord without it, this is this is D minor 7 because you got the C in there. And then finally, you're going to add the B on the bottom of that, and then you're going to strum all 5 strings, everything but the lowest. Now, when you hit that part, you're playing a D minor 6 add 9, D minor 6 add 9 again. I think this is one of the most Opethy of Opeth chords. This chord kind of repeatedly coming back in this song is really one of the things that, to me, gives it that vibe. So you do that a bunch of times, and then eventually the last time, you're going to kind of, while you're rocking that last chord, the 4th time, you're going to jump to a different chord. You're going to go. This is C add 9. For those of us that are familiar with C add 9 in regular tuning, funny the way this works. In regular tuning, you just have your pointer finger over one string compared to this. Well, one of the ways to play C add 9. So here, nothing on the 6th string, starting from 5th string, 3, 0, 2, 3, 0. So that's our C add 9. So we come out of the part beforehand. And then the next riff is like a little variation on the end of that riff. We keep having that little bass lick. But we keep landing on C add 9 there instead of the D minor 6 add 9. After doing that a bunch of times, you're going to take that same chord. Sliding it up 2 frets just gives you a D sus2. But now your buddy's actually playing that part because you're playing the short lead. Now, if you download my transcription, you'll notice that the short lead is in a different file because it was easier to write. Everything else, the lead that we have later on, is in the same document as the rest of the song. But this one, it will be a different PDF. So, all right, so this solo. Michael has a kind of cool way to find the same licks that he likes to do in standard. He sort of stumbles upon in this weird tuning, but very cool little mellow solo here. Start out with a little rake as you do the first bend. And that bend again. And this should be pretty easy in terms of fingering. It all fits nicely in 12th position. And then once you get to that 11th fret, you're just scooting over for it. The note before is staccato anyway. Then the next part. There's a little gap in there that lets you move your hand. Cool. And then a really neat lick at the end. Pretty straightforward lead. Nothing's going to keep you up late at night. Next part, I'm feeling this as 6 downbeats again. Our time signature is still 6/8, but I'm very much feeling 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, because you want to sort of feel what's on a down and an upbeat. So for that whole thing, everything's even. You have either a 16th note or a 16th note rest. They're either together or they're apart. Until the very end. There's a kind of a funny transition if you're not really counting it. But at the very end, you have your, remember we had before, our 16th note plus the 8th note rest. So it's a little subdivision of 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. That's a really cool thing, really cool transition here because it leads into doing that same rhythm over and over again for the Darkness by Her Side riff. So in order to get that rhythm correct, at the end of the previous riff, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, you can do the same thing at the beginning of this riff. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Although, and there's an anticipation on one of them, and then, so it's basically those notes, those hits are slower, and then they're faster. This is also one, if you listen to the song enough, you should have this rhythm pretty easily. Now what he does for this part of the riff is really, really cool. He's doing a hammer-on from open D to 12th fret, so D to D, hitting open D again, then hitting the middle D, the other open D, so then hitting the D on the 6th string, which is the same as the note you just hit, but it's got a really cool sound, like the same note with slightly different timbre. Then after that, while holding this note, you hit the high D on the 12th fret of the normally D string, and then you end up with one of these octaves. This is going to be important for later. Whenever you're in drop D, if you want to do an octave shape on these strings, instead of the traditional octave shape where it's pointer X ring, I like using middle X ring. You could use 1 and 2 also, but if you notice, this puts my hand in a sort of awkward position. It's easier using middle and ring. So that whole thing together. And the second half of the riff is exactly the same at the beginning. And then just simple power chords. You can really use any finger you want because you always have the open D in between. I like using ring, pointer, ring, pointer. You can do it however you want. So. Pretty straightforward lick. You do that 4 times for that verse. Then we get to the first octave lead part. Now octaves in drop D, normal drop D or this tuning from the 6th string are that shape that I just showed you. We got an excess string in the middle, but our notes are on the same fret. Normally, as I already mentioned also, octaves are pointer X ring. But in this ridiculous tuning, going from, if you're doing octaves off the A string, it's going to be pointer X, and reach your pinky up. It's a little 4-fret span. So this whole section does that. Well, the first part of the section does that. So we got. So it's just a little kind of, you can think of it as being an A minor. The first chord in the rhythm guitar is A minor, which I'll show you in a second. But so that's really the first half of this little lead. Get that nice E flat in there for some dissonance. Then the little tag on the end of this part, you're going to move way, way up. I'm using a standard set of strings here, so. Okay, the intonation's a little funky on the third string, so I apologize if some of these octaves sound a little crunchier than they should. So when you're doing octaves from third string in this tuning, now all of a sudden you're going to be real squished together. I like using pointer and ring because to me it's a more reliable way to squish that string in between. So that ending part. Also, whenever I do octaves, I'm really focused. Once I have the shape, I'm focused much more on the lower note. It's just, to me, an easier way to keep track. 14, 11, 9, 7. I also, when I'm in a weird tuning, I'm thinking much less about the real notes that I'm playing. I actually have some cheat sheets down here for some chord names because it always takes me a second to do all that calculus to figure out what chord we're actually playing. All right, so this whole octave section. Pretty straightforward once you get those two forms. And then the rhythm guitar here, really neat part. We got, I like thinking about it as like an A minor with just a little moving bass line under it. You have your A and C, enough for an A minor chord really, and on the bottom, A, G, F sharp, E flat, D. You have to do a little bit of a stretch to get some of these, but it's not too bad. If you're trying to get away with holding your hand like this, you will never be able to grab this chord. And then the next part of this riff, just start with, remember we talked about the minor chord in drop D can be played like so. Move that high note down 1 fret and you have a sus2 shape. He's doing that up here, C sus2, then an A power chord, then A flat. So put it together, A minor with the bass line, sus2, A flat, power chords. That's under that lead. That's all in the transcription. All right, and the next part, pretty simple. This is a really cool part. You can, very, very easy on guitar. Pay attention to all the cool stuff the drums and bass are doing. Just an octave, open A and A. Then we're gonna add the diminished fifth on top of that. But of course, not our normal shape because we're in this tuning, just reach up to 10. I have a little X in that riff and then a rest, so. As best I can tell, that's what he's doing on guitar. The X actually corresponds with a snare hit, which makes musical sense, it makes like feel sense. Cool, that leads you right into Inside the Hissing of Her Sanity. So on the bottom of it, it's a pretty standard drop D riff. So we got some pull-offs, some mutes, some power chords. But this is why Opeth is great. The next part is just a cool little unique thing. Slide up to 6th fret, we got our A flat here, and then we're gonna treat this like an octave, but we're not gonna play it at the same, we're not gonna play the octaves at the same time. We're gonna go slide, don't let go of that note. On the D string, go. You see, it's kind of like riffing off my octave shape, even though I'm not playing them at the same time. And then you're gonna slide your hand up, and sort of do the opposite. Now, you don't strike the lower note when you first slide your hand up, but it does ring. My transcription doesn't really show that because originally I had it showing that and it made it really ugly and hard to read. Just keep in mind that when you move from 6 to 7, when you're thinking about getting that 7, just move your middle finger. Don't let it come up. So it's time. So put it together. That riff repeats exactly the same way, and then that leads into what I'm going to call the chorus. Also, we finally have a different time signature. We're in 4/4. I wrote it as a very slow 4/4. 2, 3, 4, which means these fast notes are going to be 30-second notes. So, so this riff makes a lot of use of those octaves. We're starting off with the 30 seconds, a little power chord lick, 3, 2, 0, and now we got the octave on 9. You don't hit them together, you hit low and then high. And then instead of an octave, move your ring finger over a fret and you get this chunky chord, this crunchy chord. And then you're sliding way up to 13 with some epic vibrato. First 2 times are exactly like that. The 3rd and 4th time add a little pickup in there. Right before those 3 power chords. So. If you're keeping track, the 5th time, there is no pickup again. And then the 6th and final time, I actually had to write it as a separate thing, and there's not a repeat on those because of how there's a pickup in some of them and not. Oh, there are repeats, but if you look at the transcription, it should make sense. The 6th and final time sort of ends early and goes into this funny transition riff that hangs over the next measure. It sounds like there's a funny time signature in there, but there isn't. It's all 4/4 through this section. So the 6th time. And right from there, we have this little run. Now that run, 0, 2, 3, 5, up the D minor scale, after you hit that 5 with pinky is a perfect opportunity to move your hand, and then you'll be able to get to the rest of the riff and into the next one. You have that transition from 5th fret to open A. Keep in mind, usually they're the same note, but not in this tuning. And then that brings you into the next riff. You can think of this part of this riff, which is, I've called the Flutes and Despair riff. You can think of this riff as kind of starting with the beginning cut off a little bit. It makes sense when you kind of look at the transcription. But it's the same chord progression, but because the end of the last run is at the beginning of this measure, we don't play the first chord as much. So, and that's kind of the heavy version. So coming out of the chorus into Flutes and Despair, there is a pickup the 6th time. No pickup the 6th time. Yes, there is a pickup the 6th time. So get confused not playing it in order. So, and just from the run, so then this riff goes into just a clean version. It's the same exact chords. It's just strummed, excuse me, without the X's. Of course, the X's are where you kill some strings. So it's just playing completely open. The chords here are D minor add 9. Yeah, it's the same as the open tuning, but it's a different voicing. Followed by G minor add 9, F sharp minor add 9, and then that same little D Dorian lick we did at the end of the, its own little D Dorian lick, but I've already been playing it because I've been playing this riff. So when you do this, you might notice that D minor add 9, G minor add 9, F sharp minor add 9, they're all the same type of chord. Why isn't he just moving around the same shape? Well, he could, but it's actually cool to get the slightly different voicing that he gets. On the first one. Second one is your G minor add 9. Now for F sharp, he really could have just moved down a fret. But instead, he kind of tosses it around a little bit. But the nice thing about that open string kind of changes it up a little bit, makes it sound a little more different than it otherwise would. So, then you go into octave lead number 2. So same exact principles before, really just take that same idea and move it, different melody, different feel. Underneath that, and underneath the solo, is actually the heavy version of the Flutes Despair riff. Flutes Despair, not Flutes to Spare, in case you heard that funny. Oh, of course, it's the one with the X's in there. One more time, this second octave lead. Now the second time you do that, you're going to jump into the longer solo, kind of the main solo of the song. Also a Michael solo. First lick in there is really simple, just 3 notes, hammer them all on as groups of 3. And the next one, in order to start this lick, make sure you're starting with middle finger. Kind of a pretty normal minor lick, but because we're in this funky tuning, it ends up spanning a couple more frets than it normally would. So middle, pointer, ring, slide up, and then you're in the right place for all the last notes. The next part's really cool. It's a little tapping part. Oh, I did that wrong. So in this tapping part, so left hand's going to be assigned to these three frets over and over again. Those are the only notes left hand is doing. And right hand is doing 11, 14, 16, 18, doing that little rising bit. Now, if you take a close look at the rhythm, there's like a 5-tuplet and all sorts of crazy stuff. I tried to get it as literally close as possible. He's certainly not counting it that way. The best way to think about it is just pay attention to your long notes. Your long notes are the very first note and every tap besides the first tap. So check it out. Oh, do that better. Good. And now you'll also notice he doesn't always play all of these notes in between the taps, kind of because when you do tapping figures and really like spastic fast like that, right and left hand aren't always on 100% the same page, but it's going to sound good no matter what. And then leading out of that, I like this lick a lot. Now keep in mind, you tuned both the third and second string down a whole step. That means licks that you might be comfortable with just on those 2 strings are still going to work. It's going to be 2 frets higher. So in D minor, normally we'd be in 5th position doing this. So we're just in 7th position doing this. added bonus of adding this note on the D string, which is adding an A. If you did this whole lick down here, it would actually make this more difficult because you'd have to bar across to get that. But right here, got a neat little thing. Now this little lick looks like, it looks a lot like a unison bend, like on these two strings. But because we're in a different tuning, you get what I like to call the country lick. When you have a perfect fourth, and you bend the lower note so that you end up with a minor third. You'll recognize that normally from lead playing like this guy. And it's actually the same notes as over here. But this works out nicely, conveniently in this. He also doesn't play them at the same time. He plays them one at a time, but it's the same idea. So we got... Then the next lick is a little frantic. Just try to play it nice and slow and realize that the first three notes are slow, relatively. So we got... Then you can break the lick up into like three pieces. So you have what's at the end of measure, you're looking at the transcription, measure 102, like the very end of that, like the first part. And then we have the next part of the lick. And those notes are actually a little slower than what comes after too. Don't get too bogged down with the rhythm exact here. It's sort of flaily and fast. Get the slower notes right, and when you kind of rush the faster ones, you should kind of fall into place, especially if you know what it sounds like pretty well. Then we got... Then the lick after that is the fast one. So we got all together the three parts with a little space. Next one. And the last one. Put them together. Not too bad. If you practice it nice and slow, you should be able to get it. I'll do it one more time, connected but slow. It's actually pretty reasonable, all in the same place too. The next lick is actually a little bit similar. The only difficulty here is you do have to bar to get the 11 to 11, and live he does play this lick exactly the same way. So similarly, we can break it down into a couple parts. But if you got the last lick, this one shouldn't be giving you too much trouble. Oh. Followed by low D and a whammy bar dive. So. Then finally, the last lick is another one of those that works nicely in either tuning. You would end on this note, but we're not going to do that. So just the last lick. You can bend with pinky if you want. And that on the record, the lead ends on the D on 9th fret here. But we're going to move on to the next riff. The next riff, I call the mysterious riff because it really was killing me trying to figure it out, trying to get these chords exactly right. There's some good live footage of it where you can see what he's doing. The record is hard to hear because there are two different guitar parts and they're double tracked. So you can't use some of the slick stuff that I like to use to figure out exactly which is on which guitar, which part is on which guitar. But anyway, so we have yet another D minor add 9 played differently. Followed by D7 sus4. Again, it's a weird shape for D7 sus4, but we get all sorts of neat stuff doing this. Very much a strummy, groovy part. Just get your right hand going with it and try to get the accents. Sorry. The next one is D minor 6. There's no third in this one, but since the whole kind of D minor sound is going with it, I'm going to call it that. And then finally, if I want to be really technical, this is B flat major 7 sharp 11 with D in the bass. Also kind of my own shorthand I like to think about, that's the B flat Lydian chord. D is still the low note, D is still the tonality. I'm not going to get too much into the theory of that. Maybe one of these days I'll make a video talking about chord names and things like that. So some of you people on the internet will stop getting it really wrong. So yeah, B flat major 7, sharp 11 with D in the bass. So this is all these chords. And then the next part, actually the two guitar parts come together. It's much easier to hear. You got your A minor, then a little 2-note C chord, and then really one of the coolest parts of the whole song, I think. You might mistake this part so you hear an A, C, A, but it's A, C, hammer on, open A, open D. So you get this sound out of it. It's such a slick thing. And how do I know that? It's because you can hear the A and the D actually ring over each other a little bit. Okay. And the rest of that lick is actually pretty standard pointer finger, ring finger stuff. Make sure you put the slide in the right place. So pick, slide, hammer, open. Pick, slide, hammer, open. Right? So you got still doing good, just have to check a little technical difficulty there. Okay. I'll do that one more time. Then the other guitar part is actually just starts with an open D power chord for the first measure. And then remember our octaves on the low D string with pointer and with a middle and ring. Then for the second half of the riff, same thing on as the other guitar part. And this for the next half of the riff, he hits the open D power chord again. And he just has a different melody for his octaves. And then, of course, the rest of the lick is the same as the other guitar. So, just quick shorthand, the other guitar part, what Frederick plays live, open D power chord, octave melody, D, B flat, E. When that comes back around, it's D, A, B flat. So there's a verse over that and everything. That's that riff. Next, you go into the transition most evil. So this is, I like to think about this as D Lydian. You got your open D, another D, your sharp 4, and then resolves to the major 3rd on top. Little 7/8 measure. And then this sort of abstract run. It's he probably arrived at it just by finger stuff, what's cool. So the key to this run, it's not a hard run at all. There's one little tricky thing in there. So starting on 12th fret with pointer finger, make sure you use assign one finger to one fret. You don't even need any pinky here. The weird thing is when you have to go 14 to 14, and you do want to use the bar for that. After that, so after that 12th fret, that A, that longer note, then you're going to sort of change your hand position. Actually, sorry, after the 14. At least that's how I do it. You could change your hand position earlier. So you got your B right there. And now you're going to need 11th fret. Use pointer finger. Middle finger is going to go on 12 and do this little stretchy guy to get your 15. And it's basically the same lick twice. So you got your first part in 12th position, assign one finger to one fret. Then you're going to shift down one fret and have this kind of stretchy deal. These two fingers together, pinky far apart. And that's that little transition part. Then you go back into the riff we did before. If you listen to the record there, it's much easier to pick out because he's not using the 12 string anymore. So it's easier to hear which strings he's hitting. You do that 1.5 times, and then you jump into what I'm calling the heavy ahs. Where you're just doing the octaves. And that same little bass line-y figure we've had a bunch of times. And then that's actually the same as it was on the acoustic stuff. And there you have that whole, and then, it's a funny riff because it starts with the second half and then it goes back into the beginning of the riff. And now instead of doing the light version of it, we have the heavy version of it. Now we're doing those kind of pain in the butt octaves with a big stretch, so we can have the low D ringing on the bottom this whole time. And then back into that second half we already talked about. Now the last time you do that, the ending's truncated and you go into sort of a variation on the end of that riff. That's your lower guitar part. So the second time of the heavy ahs I'll play going into it. Get your buddy to play the higher part. So that's 4 times with that harmony. And then finally you're in the end. It's such a cool riff. If you're still with me, thank you very much for following. So the very last lick of the song is really easy but very cool lick. Really cool phrasing, like the way the notes are arranged, just really cool, really neat. Great way to end the song. It's a single note run on both guitars and just the very last measure is harmonized. That's the first part of it, and you can do that really simply in second position. The open string lets you move over, so it's real easy with pointer and ring. The next note in my transcription might look like a slide from 5 to 8, but it's really a slide into 8 from wherever. The key is using middle finger. So we got middle finger. So again, that's a pretty easy lick. If you slid with middle finger, it makes good sense. And finally, the very end, the lower guitar part, just C's to D's, and the higher guitar part, diatonic third above, E to F. So the ending. One more time, I'll do just a harmony at the end, and I'll do it slower too. And there you have it. That is Ghost of Perdition, beginning to end. Thank you very much for watching. Please check out my band Terriginous, subscribe, and stay tuned for the full playthrough.